Will the comments come in that I can see too, or are they going to be like just on your end?
I'm actually not sure. I know it'll be on my end, but if it's not on yours too, then I'll share them because I can
Yeah.
message you on WhatsApp.
Cool.
Cool. Okay, it's loading. I was testing it out a couple times today and it seemed to kind of like preload. So it picks up like probably right now, which is probably awkward, but we're just gonna go with it. I'll
That's
share.
always how on like
No, no, no.
podcasts and stuff. They always started on awkward mid conversation point, but that's just how life is.
Okay, I was testing it out a couple times today, and it seemed to kind of like preload, so it picks up like probably right now, which is probably awkward, but we're just gonna go with it. It's a delay. I don't know. Okay, cool. We can start. All right, so Jen, I'm sure everyone here knows you. I think they actually know you better than they know me by now because you have done so well. No, really though, because your book and your public content has been so helpful to so many people struggling with such isolating and such truly nightmarish conditions, right?
Yeah.
We're in such a time right now where we have these new conditions that our grandparents didn't have actually, or if they did, it was a very small percentage of the population. And as such, the folks getting these conditions don't really have much support. So I think it's a real blessing to have you here today and to get your voice out to even more people about all the different nervous system conditions, histamines, all the things that you work with, right? Because that covers the whole body. So everyone, this is Jen Donovan. If you don't know her, I had the pleasure of meeting. Gosh, when did we meet, Jen? I don't know what year it was. It was a long time ago. Yeah.
I remember it more clearly than you do, I'm sure.
No, I remember our first meeting so well, so well. But we've known each other since we were both practicing in Oregon. And it has been, I feel like we've both had so many lives since then, gratefully. Yes, gratefully. Not that that life was better for me than for you. You were going through the thick of it at that time. But as always, these things are such a burst of life. So yes. Yes. So Jen, tell us a little bit about yourself for our audience, and then we can dive into some of your work. For those of you, just quickly, Jen has an amazing book. If you haven't read it, you must pick it up. I will put the links down below. She also has this killer website, which she's redoing, but you can access it. And on there are so many options for you to get help. It's one of the things I really appreciate about you. You really reach out in so many different ways. So Jen, tell us a bit about yourself.
Yeah. Thank you so much for having me on here. I'm so excited for this conversation. I love any chance we get to just kind of riff and see where both our heads are at. But yeah, so I met you at the thick of my like dark night of the soul, basically. And before that, I was practicing as a mental health therapist. I was working on my mental health license. I was working in community health, community mental health. So it was a very intense, stressful job. I was often working with families where there is a lot of abuse and trauma going on. But that was really like my passion. I really wanted to help people in very adverse circumstances. And little did I know that I would become one of those people in very adverse circumstances, although in a very different way. So I already knew a lot about mental health and the brain, and I was learning more about the nervous system. So I was already kind of on that journey, but then my health just completely crashed. Part of it was, I think, due to like being in grad school and then like starting this very stressful job and, being a very hyper functioning kind of person. Like I've got that type A personality, like always need to be doing more and more and more, like work hard, play hard, that kind of person. And I wasn't listening to cues of my body that something was going very wrong inside. And I had always been, now that I look back, I can see I was always kind of like a histamine person. Now I can kind of see the signs, just having allergies, so many allergies as a kid, like my mom would just be embarrassed sometimes because I'd be in public and I would have these weird like sneezing fits where I like could not stop sneezing. I would get weird rashes. We would stay at a hotel and like I'd be all itchy, the next day from whatever they were washing the sheets in. Always kind of ran anxious. So now looking back, I'm like, oh, I always had a histamine issue. But I didn't know it then. And it got much, much, much worse during this period of time. And yeah, I crashed really hard. I had a series of antibiotics, which I think was probably the like final straw that broke the camel's back, and found myself in very dire straits mentally and physically. So that's when I decided I needed to figure out my own path to health because I couldn't find help in the conventional medical field. Everyone that I saw, even when I finally kind of figured out what mast cell activation syndrome was and what I was dealing with, the options are just pick your cocktail of antihistamines and mast cell stabilizers and like hope it gets better on its own someday. And I've always been kind of like a skeptical, think outside the box kind of person. Like I don't necessarily just like automatically trust authority. I want to like find things out myself. So I just couldn't accept that. I knew there had to be a reason why I crashed so hard so suddenly. I just couldn't believe that my immune system was just randomly revolting, and that I was going to just have to live the rest of my life that way. So I struck out on my own, and along the way found you. You were one of my key mentors in my recovery. Yeah, just couldn't go back to life the way it was once I had recovered. Once I really dedicated myself, it took me about 2 years to get to a place where I felt like I was back, in a pretty healthy place. And, once you see certain things, you just can't unsee them. So I just totally overhauled my career and went back and got some nutrition certifications and started helping others.
And my gosh, have you helped others? I mean, it's been so impressive. So impressive. It's so funny. Often I'll run into someone and they find out what I do and they're like, do you know Jen Donovan? So you've really been a gift to the world. And I think, although no one wants to go through what you did, the rest of us are very lucky for what you've done because each of us brings ourselves into this illness and brings ourselves out as well. And so you kind of bring out these different gifts and you never know, I'm sure you see this too, you never know how it's going to present in someone's life as they go into remission and into their second phase of life or 18th phase of life. But I think it's been so amazing the way that you've brought in your prior work with the nervous system and with human health into this. Yeah, definitely. I know we have a lot of questions and if you can't see the YouTube chat, I'll bring it over, but I know that folks submitted questions to both of us. I have a question for you though, before we get started. So, okay, you have new theories as to why, and totally fine if you don't, because who does, but as to why we're seeing so many histamine cases now, because when you came in, that was so rare, right? And
so rare.
Yeah. Completely. And I feel like
no one had heard of it. Yeah.
Exactly, right? How many practitioners had you been to? And I feel like now patients and practitioners find it right away, even before other things. They're like, yep, I definitely have histamine issues, da, 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 da. And it's not from knowledge. I see it so much more. I'm sure you do too. Do you have any theories?
Yeah. I mean, 2020 was a really, that year, man, that really changed things in a lot of ways. And so that's really when I saw the spike starting was, really post 2020. Although, of course, I think it's a both and, because I also think the spreading awareness of it, people who have been having these symptoms since, 2015, 2010, 2005, now they're like, oh, that's what I've been dealing with all this time. So I think the numbers do get a little inflated just from that education. But 2020, like, no matter where we were, was an incredibly traumatic and stressful year, physically and emotionally, psychologically, on all levels. So not only was everyone terrified, before we knew what was going on, like people on all sides of political, social spectrum were all very afraid, sometimes for different reasons, but everyone was really afraid. Like that was the common theme. We were all so scared. That tanks your immune system, right? When we're fearful, like our immune system cannot function at its full level. So just on a psycho-emotional level, like we're just setting ourselves up to, if we do have to take antibiotics or we are exposed to some kind of toxin, or some kind of pathogen, our immune system is so much less likely to be able to handle it optimally, and we're more likely to get this highly inflammatory chronic response. And then, obviously, we also started sterilizing and bleaching and sanitizing everything, so on a physical level, like we started avoiding the sunlight, we stopped interacting, we started sterilizing everything. Those are all things that physically disrupt our microbiome. Yeah. Right. And so I think, let alone, I don't know if we can say the V word on here, but that and the two V words, yes. I'll just say it. Okay, if I just say it.
Sure. Yeah, I don't know. I have no idea. Maybe we won't.
Vaccine,
maybe they'll take us down. Right? I don't know. Yeah.
Yeah, both of these things, right? I mean, these are hard on our immune system. And so the fact that so many more people were exposed to both of those things in a very short period of time, there's just that. But we were set up to have a poor response to these things because we were scared and we were over sterilized even more than we were before. So that's the theory that I'm working with.
I think that's a really good one. It's very true about the sterilization, unquestionably, actually. Yes. What I really hadn't put that together. What was your experience like? Did you have fear when it happened? How did you respond? I'm curious.
Yeah, I did at first. I think there was just so much that was unknown, and I think there was also that visceral feeling, like when things first shut down, like going out and seeing the streets just like dead, like main streets with like no cars. That's just a frightening visceral experience for our nervous system to have things like so suddenly so different.
Yes.
So just even if you were trying to approach it from a balanced standpoint, there's just that you can't help that nervous system response to like everything is kind of glowing still and quiet. So I think that really did affect people's nervous system. It did mine, to experience that. I was then, as things started rolling out in the months to come, I very quickly felt like people were taking the wrong approach. Just from everything I had learned about the immune system and the nervous system, it just didn't make sense to me, the measures that were being taken. And so at that point, I was less fearful, but then there was all the stress of all the social division that started happening from it. I mean, people started feeling very intensely about these issues on all sides. And again, no matter what side you landed on, that's dysregulating for the immune system to kind of be like, I don't know, like whose team I'm on and like who's going to be mad at me and, who might stop talking to me. And I mean, all of this kind of stuff. I mean, the social divisiveness that has come, post this experience is very sad. I think has caused a lot of stress as well.
Definitely. Yes, definitely. That's very true. Another question, but I feel like I will I'll monopolize your time. I feel like I'm going to monopolize.
No, this is great.
I know everyone had so many questions. I've been really wondering. I've been doing an maybe insane, maybe unhealthy level obsession research into very specific bacteria as of late. In fact, some people know about this. Almost everyone I've met with the last 2 weeks I've told about because I'm waiting for my house to open up. I have one more week. And so I've been staying at this hotel and it's so lovely. Like the people are so nice, but the hotel itself is so loud. It's like there's a generator in the wall and I'm a good sleeper, but oh my goodness. So I've been using this time and I've been graphing all of my bacterial knowledge. And I just started to see a lot of things coming together of certain microbes that are really necessary in order for the epigenetic links to not get kicked on, in order for the histamines to denigrate, in order for the cortisol denigrate. So I'm on that new kind of hypothesis, but I'm not really sure. I'm not really sure. I'm not sure. We'll see. We'll see. But yeah, that was a very interesting time. And I think your pulling out of the sterilization actually feeds into kind of where I'm diving in, because the I wasn't here during that time, right? I was in Zimbabwe, and then I was in for the thick of it, and then I was in about 30 countries going around,
Right.
and it was so different there because you know, they had just had Ebola. And so it was taken very seriously at first, but as soon as that had passed, it was kind of the opposite. After the first couple of weeks, then it was like, oh, no one is bleeding from the eyeballs. Let's have dinner parties,
We're
right?
fine, right? Yeah.
Yes, it was
Yeah.
very different.
Yeah.
It was very different. But I do, okay, no, I do. I have to. I'm going to ask one other thing, and we can
Sure.
circle back if you need some time to think about it. So many people are truly, really suffering, right? I was just speaking to someone today, and I was talking to them about if they had envisioned their future. And we started talking about death and how I'm sure this is quite individual, but for me, going through this process, and I think for many, death would have been a gift when I was sick. It was not something to fear. It was, that would be a relief from the pain, right? And so I think a lot of that comes from the not seeing the folks that have gotten better, which is certainly changing. Thankfully for YouTube and all these other forums, people are seeing all the cases that go into remission. And so there is a real path, and many paths actually, that people can follow. Yes, yeah. And but there's still this incredible isolation and sadness, even when people have the most supportive families, the most important supportive system, which very few do, but we both see people that do, and that's wonderful. It's still isolating though. And I think one thing that we don't have in our dialogue is what people need for support in this situation, right? We have that for immediate situations like cancer. We don't have it for chronic illness. And it's confounding for the families, it's confounding for the person going through it. Have you thought about what would have been wonderful for you to have received, for someone to have done for you when you were going through that?
Oh my gosh, that's such an excellent question. Um, I feel like I almost had probably the best possible situation that could have happened. I feel so blessed that I had the support system around me that I did. And so I think, and I, like you said, I still felt totally isolated, but I guess I'll say first, I think part of that is actually necessary. So I think there is kind of this going through the underworld and rebirth process that needs to happen when you go through an extreme situation, you know, whether it's illness or whatever it is. And some of that requires us to permit, to really like go inward and like relearn ourselves and relearn our identity. I remember feeling like I had no idea who I was anymore in that 2017, that first year of my healing, because I had to give up to heal. I realized I had to give up almost everything that I had identified with, like my whole adult life. I had to change my personality. I had to change my, you know, tastes. I had to change the way I thought about things. I changed my whole worldview. Like I had been a very like materialist kind of like skeptic, you know, beforehand, and like things really started shifting for me very quickly as this whole world opened up. And so I kind of felt like I had to distance myself from the people who had been in my life in a way, both physically, you know, just because I couldn't do as much, but also mentally, emotionally, I just kind of had to withdraw for people. And I remember feeling very distant from others. And I had to kind of like work out this discombobulation from the inside out, like on my own. So I think embracing that is actually really important. Like I remember, I think I heard you even maybe say, I can't remember was to me, or I just heard you on an interview say your own special silent retreat. You know, like if you can look at it as like a uh as actually a really sacred thing, even if it's uncomfortable, even if it's difficult, even if it's not like your ideal of what you want to do. But I was lucky that I had a job that gave me medical leave. So I timed actually when you made me cut the oatmeal and rice out of my diet. I felt like I was absolutely dying. I
I'm
actually
sorry.
timed that with taking medical leave. Um, and that like I had that job security that I knew I could come back to it and still just like lie in bed for 6 weeks, you know, while I was going through that experience. And oh my gosh, if everyone had that privilege, you know, if everyone had that kind of job security and medical benefits, because I get so many people who like they want to do the deep healing, but like they can't be in bed for
Yeah.
6 weeks. Like they're supporting themselves, they're supporting their family. And so we have to kind of work around that. Um, but yeah, I mean, I think, yeah, that like just literal economic security is a big part of it for so many people. And then, you know, family and friends that aren't constantly asking you if you're feeling better yet, you know, that understand that this is like, it's a chronic illness, meaning it's not short, it's not over quickly. It's like a long-term thing. And it can take years to recover, you know? So a lot of people get really stressed out when they are that I talk to who are, you know, they're on these restrictive therapeutic diets, you know, these practices for weeks and weeks and months, sometimes years. And people are like, you're still on that? Like, isn't it working yet? And so just having a shift in our timeline expectation, both ourselves, but also the people who care about us. Like this is a long-term process that we're investing in. Um, I think that would be excellent support as well.
That would be so good. That would be so good. Yes, because I think one of the difficulties about family, friends, coworkers knowing what you're doing, different things that you're trying, is that you yourself, as the person going through it, don't know if it will work. So you don't have that confidence yet to, stand up in a conversation, nor do you have the energy or the mental acuity at that point because you're dealing with a major mental or physical illness, right? That does affect the energy of the brain. And so, I do think that's a huge difficult factor, as well as the idea of timelines, right? I don't know. Yeah, I don't know about you. Um, it was so surprising to me when it's everything is always a double-edged sword, right? There's always a benefit and a cost to everything in this world, right? And one of the benefits I think of dealing with illness right now, especially chronic illness or some of the ones that you and I had, is that there are millions of people now that have it, whereas that was not the case when you and I were sick. But there's also like YouTube and all these places where you can learn an enormous amount and you can see all these people that have healed. But what was surprising to me, and it shouldn't have been, that's a fault on my own lack of perspective at the time, but it was surprising to me how many people were discouraged that, oh, well, that person got better by this time, so I should too. And who knows? No one has a crystal ball, right? We're diving into microbiomes and nervous systems, and everything is so unique. We don't know what's in your house. We don't know what your history is. Our nervous systems are wired when we are in our grandmother's body, right?
Right.
Those are
Yeah.
factors that are wildly different for each one of us. And although there's many actually, there's many patterns, there's always a range. And so I think for those of you listening, if you're starting in this time and age, take the benefit and release the requirements on it, which I know is a tall ask in where we live, because we don't have medical like almost every other country, if not all. And we don't have these security systems, and we have real pressures to be doing and not just doing, but providing. And so I do appreciate that. But know that anytime we have an opportunity or we learn something new that might help us, that is a gift. And it is a gift that few generations before got, right? Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. That was the biggest, I think that was the biggest gift I gave myself, was taking my timeline away. I stopped envisioning, because at first I was very much like, okay, if I just do this for 6 weeks, then I can go back to normal. Like I had that mentality very much in the very beginning. And I finally started realizing okay, I get it. Like, this is a long-term process. And so I started, like, when I was doing my visualization practice, I started visualizing myself like 5 or 10 years in the future. And that just gave me so much like space, because anything can happen in 10 years, that's it. And so I felt no more pressure. I was like, you know what, if I'm exactly how I am for the next 10 years, like, it's going to be okay. And that released so much weight off my nervous system.
That's an amazing tip. Amazing. Yeah, because anything that takes the weight off the nervous system, that real physical feeling, because I felt that when you said that, I felt anything that does that, even if it's a mental trick, that's going
Yeah.
to help you, because it takes
Yeah.
those stress hormones down. And anytime we bring those down, regeneration can happen.
Yeah.
Well, okay. So everyone who's watching and everyone who watches later, please put in the comment section what, if you can think of anything that you would really love that your family could give you, could do
Yeah.
for you. Or if you don't have anyone, think of the act that would be so nice. Like for me, I was young, like you, Jen. So I don't know if I would have had the words to say it or even the thought at the time. But when I think back on it, I would have loved someone to hold my hand and watch a movie with me. Like that would
Yeah.
have been like everything, because I couldn't really speak, and interaction was too tiring, right? And most of my body hurt too much, but I also didn't want to be alone. I just wanted the presence of someone who was also present with me. That would have been really nice for me. So I'd love to hear the things for you all so that we can better educate
Yeah.
the community and the family. Definitely.
Yeah.
Should we dive into the questions?
Yeah.
Okay,
I
great.
think, are you getting a lot on your end? I have a few from Instagram as well. I don't know what we do first.
Yes, definitely. Why don't we start with yours first, and then we'll
Okay.
dive
So I did get, of course, a fair amount of questions about histamine.
in.
Um, and some really interesting questions about, die-off or detox reactions and histamine flares, in terms of knowing the difference between a detox reaction and a histamine flare. Like, how do you know it's a detox reaction and you're not just getting worse? What to do when you're in this highly inflamed detox reaction state, but you're also a very sensitive person. Like, how do you self-support that? And this, I feel like, would be maybe a great place for us to start. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this too. I might just start off by saying, I don't think there is a difference between a detox reaction and a histamine flare. Would you say that as well?
Yeah, kind of, yes, in many ways. Mhm.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, and I remember you taught me this. I remember getting so frustrated, like coming back to our follow-ups and being like, I'm still getting hives, like I'm still getting rashes, like when is this gonna end? And you sharing with me, like, every time you detox or heal a cell, you release histamine. Like, that is a normal healing, detoxifying, inflammatory response in the body. And so this is why it's so important to not just focus on getting rid of your symptoms, but actually looking at what's going on underneath. Because if you are actually doing deep healing and detoxification work, you're going to have these upticks in symptoms through the process. So, I generally see detox reactions like kind of come and go. It's not just kind of like this long, steady, flare that I would consider more of like, maybe I feel like we're like missing something, so to speak. And so things that like spike and then come down, I usually see that as a detox reaction more. Do you distinguish at all, Mary, in your clients, or?
Not
Yeah.
really, not by much.
Yeah.
I mean, histamine is gonna, like you said, it's released every time we regenerate a cell. It's
Yeah.
released anytime we heal any tissue at all. So,
Yeah.
it can be very counterintuitive as anyone with histamine issues, but also just anyone who's ill and actually doing a truly regenerative protocol, right? There's lots of protocols that are not regenerative, and then there's a handful of ones that are. There's about 10 that are. And so when you're on a regenerative protocol, it's like healing a bone. It's painful. It's not fun.
Yep.
And I do think on one hand, a lot is kind of labeled as die off or detox that isn't. But it's a misnomer. And I think if that phrase wasn't used so often, I would still love it because it is
Yeah.
scientifically accurate, right? What's
Yes.
often happening is that, okay, let's say you're not eating the food that can feed a bacterial family. So that bacterial family has a lifespan. And if you don't have that food for a certain amount of time, that starves out, they die. And in the death process, those bacteria release a toxin. Now, most often, if you have a chronic illness, part of why you have it is because your liver is working, but maybe not at like optimal levels, right?
Yeah.
I mean, we get all the epigenetic sequences in our office from COMT to
Yeah.
MTHFR and all these things, right? And that makes sense because if the phase 2, phase 3 in the liver was working perfectly, then we wouldn't get bogged down as easily, right? It wouldn't tip us
Yeah.
towards the cliff. So that's normal to have those when you're dealing with a chronic illness, but it also means that when you are really regenerating tissue and therefore have waste to get rid of, it has to go through those channels. And if it doesn't go through those channels right away, then it's recirculated until the
Yep.
liver can get to it or other detox organs can get to it. And that means you're going to get an uptick wherever that lodges, right? Which is
Yes.
typically the nervous system or the hair. So yeah, you can't get one without the other, really.
Yes.
Yeah, I can't think of any instances where you would. Do you?
No, no. And I think the key here is like pacing, like this magical word pacing, because what I tend to see, and I fell into this too early on, like people with these conditions tend to be very black and white, all or nothing thinkers, right? And it's part of the personality type that I think also comes with those SNPs that you were talking about too. And I get people who either want to do all the detox things all at once and like go straight from, their very starch heavy diet to like carnivore in the matter of a week, right? And then are completely miserable, or they do, you know, a 2 hour castor oil pack every night for a whole week and then have a big flare and say, I can't do castor oil, because I react to it. And if we again take off the pressure and the rush, like I was saying before, and we recognize that these responses are healing responses, it's just, yeah, if they're making you completely miserable, like back off a little, pace a little bit, let those detox pathways catch up, like you were saying. And that's what I did. Like it took me almost, I want to say almost 4 months, if I'm remembering correctly, to fully eliminate starch out of my diet, because every time I took something out, I would feel so awful and I would be in like a 2 week flare at least after that before it would kind of come down. And so I just did it in stages. But on the other end are people who are so frightened of any symptom that they won't progress in the process. They won't implement a new thing or they won't eliminate a food because any uptick in symptoms, they think they're getting worse. And I also did that early on where like if I had one more hive or welt on my skin than I usually did, I'd be like, oh no, I can't do that. And I learned to kind of ride that out a little bit, like keep an eye on it. Like you always want to be safe with these things, but understanding that uptick was a natural process and not something that I needed to get really anxious about, but that I could ride out and could trust that it would settle.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I think that's really important because we spend most of, I think, well, at least I did. I don't know. I shouldn't speak for you all. I think we spend a lot of time with the illness, especially while I was in denial and while I was trying to like just look normal and whatnot to the outside world as much as possible. I would be very reactive to the symptoms. So I would like hide when they were going on, right? And so I would try to figure out things that could mask them or that could hide them. And then I was constantly in reaction to the symptoms. And reaction was leading to more illness ultimately, right? And
Yep.
yeah, it's only when I took like an eagle eye view and was like, okay, what's really going on? Which takes a lot of education,
Yeah.
because yeah, and self-education, which is a
Self-education.
tough thing when you're ill. But the
Yeah.
yeah, so don't feel bad, guys, if you haven't gotten there,
Yeah.
because my gosh, the brain has to work a
Oh
bit for
yeah.
yeah. But
Well,
mhm,
and I would add to that if I might, just about the, how do I know I'm not getting worse?
mm,
I personally would just recommend that you take that whole concept of getting worse and just like throw it out. Because how dysregulating is that? Even if I think to myself, am I getting worse? Like if I just say that to myself right now, like I can already feel myself feeling agitated, you
yes,
know, just from that thought.
yeah.
Because that's such a despairing, like you just see this like tunnel of doom just like opening up in front of you when you think that way. And are my symptoms changing? Are the symptoms of my condition shifting? I mean, those are valid questions to ask. And we do want to mindfully track those and kind of see what, our illness and symptoms look like over time in response to what we're doing. But I would just encourage people to like not even consider that as a possibility when you're on this journey. There's no utility to it whatsoever.
Yeah, we need like cheerleaders here for what you said. The seriously, seriously, for reals. Yeah, I would wipe that from the vocabulary. I really would. And I would really think about too, I think it really helps to think about yourself as your own child and what we do for your own child, because we know when we're parents or when we're responsible for someone else, that sometimes the hard thing, the thing that doesn't feel good, is the right thing to end,
Yeah.
to give the person the ultimate life. And I think
Yeah.
we often forget that with ourselves. So doing it with compassion and empathy and kindness and love prevents you from doing something cavalier or risky, too risky, right? You have to take risk, but too risky, and still to move beyond, and then to add a question if you're going to ask questions. I don't recommend that many questions, to be honest. For someone who asks a lot of questions, it was when I stopped asking that I I started to figure out how to get better. But looking for the answer and all of that, that's just waste of time for me personally. In many ways, not in always, of course, but I think in many ways more kind of stepping back and saying, okay, what is good for these things? And then if you are asking something, ask, am I doing something that would provoke a regeneration of human tissue or not? Because if there's a lot
Right.
of symptoms, but you're eating pizza, well, or whatever you deem to be normal and healthy, well, that's problematic, right? But if you're doing something with strategy to really dig yourself out of this hole and you have the symptoms, well, that makes sense, you
Yeah.
know? Yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Absolutely.
Okay, let me see.
Do you have a question?
You do the next one because I have to pull mine up.
Okay. Um, let's see here. Oh, I got some questions about oxalates too. And I don't know, this is interesting because I see this can really go into a doom and gloom place for people too. I feel like the oxalate issue has become a little intense. Uh, so one is just kind of a practical question, like how do you manage oxalate dumping when you have to be low histamine? So for example, like you can't do lemon juice, you can't do the citrate minerals. So some folks with histamine issues are obviously sensitive to those kinds of things. So what would you help with oxalate dumping? And I mean, the easiest thing that I can think of would just be to add back in a low histamine, higher oxalate food and just pace that better. Um, I when I discovered oxalates, I cut them all out of my diet at once.
Oh no.
Yeah, just like that all or nothing mentality. It's hard to break, you guys. Um, but I was well enough at that point. I actually didn't cut oxalates. I didn't know about them like in the first year of my healing journey. So it wasn't until later that I learned about them and cut them out. And so I could handle it. So I ended up just pushing through. But I had a pretty brutal, I think I've showed you the picture of the oxalate rash that I had like all over my belly. Um, so if I could go back, instead of just like warrioring through it, I probably would have just like eaten some beets for goodness sake. Like, like something that's low histamine, but will just add a little bit of oxalate back into your diet. They're not things to be critically afraid of. We can, again, pacing. I don't know if you have any other tips you want to add to that.
1000% agree. Yeah, because it's very often for oxalates to be built up as well. Histamine folks, because before they know what they're dealing with, they often will be adjusting their diet kind of in a necessary way, right, to get through life. And so you can
Yeah.
often end up eating a lot of oxalate foods and have quite a
Yeah.
buildup. I find them in some cases, and this isn't to scare anyone, of course, but it's true that for some people, it's very dangerous actually to eliminate them all at once because it
Yeah.
can change the pH of the blood. So if you're someone with, like I had a very severe kidney disease when I learned about oxalates, and thankfully, I adjusted very slowly. I took 50 grams
Yeah.
out a week. So I was fine. And I didn't have the big long journey that so many people have. It was just
Yeah.
improvement, which is rare. And I wouldn't expect that, folks. But that was lucky on my part. It was one part that was lucky. But the slow reduction, and if the symptoms become too much, then you bring them back in to a small
Yeah.
degree, like someone was saying, is I genuinely think is the perfect way, because if we're too afraid of it, the stress of the removal of them on the body can be really too intense. Now, for most, if you don't have diabetes type 1, if you don't have a severe kidney disease, you're not going to go into acidosis. So you guys don't have to
Yeah.
worry about that. I was one of those people. So I watch for that in folks because I've lived in that camp. But
Yeah.
I do think the overall fear of oxalates is, on one hand, overbearing. And on the
Yeah.
other, it's also true because you've got all these
Yeah.
people eating spinach salads and spinach smoothies. So, but
Yes.
yeah, I would do it gently. I wouldn't be afraid of them to have small amounts in order to slow down the issue,
Yeah.
because it's a marathon, it's not a race. Yeah.
Yeah, and kind of on that note, I just want to highlight what you said because I had a few other questions about like, should we be concerned about the oxalate content in various foods like bone broth or things like that? And I think oxalates are a real thing that have a physical effect on our bodies that can exacerbate or sometimes even cause, chronic illness symptoms. And so we do want to be knowledgeable about them. We do want to be aware of them. But at the same time, anything that is making you feel fearful and micromanaging your food to that extent, like that is not in service of your healing. And so if it's really therapeutic, like for example, if I have someone who's really struggling with their electrolytes, they sometimes will have them juice some like carrots and celery, which for the antioxidant camp, they'd be like, whoa, don't do that. But if it's helping someone's electrolytes, like nothing horrible is going to happen from like having a few, medium oxalate
No,
things here and there,
1000%. Yeah, I mean, I will often use myself as an example because I didn't have Sally Norton level oxalates, but I had
Yeah.
a big oxalate
Yeah.
load. And I still ate oxalate foods. I still had berries. I had small portions of nuts.
Yeah.
And to be honest, the first, I don't know, 8 years of my practice or so, when I was taking oxalates down for people, or when I was working with specific kidney or stone or oxalate issues, we wouldn't fully eliminate, we would minimize. And I do mean
Yes.
minimize, like under 50 grams a day. But we usually didn't have to go fully out. So
Yeah.
yeah, I think your advice is A+.
And
Perfect.
it's probably what you're seeing in some of your travels too with the seasonality of eating, like I will sometimes eat things that are higher oxalate, but then I won't for a period of time, and so I think this is how we can balance having ancestral nutritional knowledge without becoming incredibly dogmatic and fearful. It's all about that balance.
Yeah, because really, rigidity is the
Yeah.
opposite of health. Now, discipline, that's healthy.
Yes.
Yeah, responsibility, that's healthy.
We should do a whole YouTube live on the difference between those two
Let's
things.
do it. That'll be our next one. I'm in. I'm so in. I think that's so needed. Yes, definitely. Done. We're gonna put that on the calendar. Definitely. Um, okay, let's see. I've got one on explaining the more on the phase 1 and 2 channels of the liver detox pathways. So, Jen, do you work with these very much?
So, when you go to nutrition school, you learn about these things, right? And you get your handy dandy little liver charts, right? Around like what nutrients feed into what pathways and what get detoxed through different pathways. And I do think, to be a competent practitioner, you want to have some sense of these things.
Mhm.
But I will say more and more, I'm like not even bringing this stuff up to people.
Yeah.
Because I think this is where research science and clinical practice like start to really schism, right? Like it's fascinating. I think the biochemistry is as absolutely fascinating. And sometimes it can explain some interesting quirks that you see in people's symptoms. But for the most part, I feel like this just gets way too into the weeds. And people bypass their own healing through scientific research papers. Like people will be digging into PubMed and like figuring out the exact spot in their liver detox pathways that they think is blocked, as opposed to just doing the foundational healing practices like day to day that are actually just going to get the whole system working together. So I don't know if there's like a more specific part of that question or where they just wanted me to talk about them, but
No, they
honestly, I
really
just
just want
like
to talk about it. Yeah, I would
zoom
say
out. It's too in the weeds, I think, for most people.
I would agree. I think, and I think that if when you research, you are inspired and
Yeah,
you're not being reactive, you're not changing course immediately, you're not throwing what you were just doing in the mud,
yeah.
and it's not a pattern. And if you're not instead discouraged and hopeless,
Mhm.
then it's
Yep.
fine. But if you
Right.
have discouragement, if you have hopelessness, if you have the never ending, oh, it must be this, and then doing something for 30 days, 90 days, and then like, oh no, it must be this, then you're shooting
Right.
yourself in the foot. So I think the knowledge about the liver pathways are helpful for those in the carnivore crowd, because we are currently working with a population that has a very different microbiome than humans have ever had before. And so when we
Yeah.
use the traditional diets, whereas 20 years ago, 40 years ago, it was enough for most, for some it's not. So for
Yeah.
those who say have been a year on a low fiber protocol, let's say, or they're just
Mhm.
doing for on their own and their estrogen progesterone is imbalanced, well,
Right.
obviously lifestyle, look at your lighting, your sleep
Yeah.
habits, your stress levels, because we are frankly living as men today, whether we realize it or not. And that drives up cortisol for women. The same activities that for men bring it down, bring it up for us. And that gets in the way of phase 2, phase 3. So for some
Right.
people, they will benefit from having things like, binders for phase 2, phase 3, not binder supplements, folks. These
Yes.
are foods,
Yes.
right? Like
Yes.
onions or carrots or broccoli or whatnot, which you don't actually have to know the biochemistry of. You can just eat those foods, right? So again, going back to your point, if you just have the foundational knowledge of, okay, I'm going to do, maybe you start with carnivore, right? Everybody starts at a different point and there's so many ways to heal. I just want to say that 1,000 times over. But let's say, you do carnivore for 3 months or 12 months, and then you bring in like non-starchy vegetables that combine to them. That's going to take care of it without you having to know any of the biochemistry, right? So
Yeah.
you don't have to go in and know the genes. it's our job. It's like for you and I to know so that we can guide people through it. Not to say that you guys aren't allowed to, it's just that it can be overwhelming for sure.
Yeah, and I've had people get really fixated on, oh no, I can't have this nutrient because I have this pathway blocked in my liver. And first of all, I'm like, there's no way you could actually know that. And then also now you're mentally blocking yourself to ever be able to tolerate anything with that nutrient. And I'm sorry, but the body just is so much more complex than just these little linear diagrams that we have in our textbooks, and there's so
Yeah.
many other complex factors here. So yeah, just, the reason that certain foods are therapeutic is because they're high in glycine, cysteine, methionine. Like, guess what? We need those nutrients for phase 1 and phase 2 detoxification. But if you're just eating, in like a GAPS, or otherwise kind of healing style, you're getting those nutrients. And then if you're doing your basic detox support, if you're doing your sunlight exposure, if you're doing your nervous system regulation, like those pathways are just going to naturally open up for the most part. But I want to honor what you said. I mean, there are those people who feel like they've done all the things and it's a year in and they're still really struggling. And in that case, like, yeah, maybe we want to look a little closer, but
Yeah.
make sure you've got the foundations like really solid before you go there. It's not necessary most of the time.
I would agree. And also, I think many of the things that are kind of washed away as that can't possibly help are actually the things that get us there. Like, okay, we keep talking about the liver, right? And I don't know any practitioner that doesn't, but the liver is it's not where we're supposed to be processing our fat soluble toxins. We're supposed to do it through our breathing, right? 70% are supposed to come this way, but you have to have perfect posture for that. And you have to have the tongue at the right place in the mouth. And you have to be nasal breathing for that. And your cortisol has to be down for that, not on the floor. We need cortisol. It's what wakes us up. So when you guys have chronic fatigue, like make love to your cortisol. It's just at the right time. It's confused. It's got dyslexia. That's it. So that, it's just confused. Like, not that dyslexics are confused at all, but you know what I mean? So yeah, so really the things of working on posture and the things that no one wants to do will go so far in you never having to know the things that Jen and I know, right? Like, who wants to spend their time on this stuff? So that, yes. And then always put in front of yourself the question of, do I feel more relaxed and joyful when I'm going into this research? If not, don't go. Because the follow your bliss thing of Joseph Campbell, I know seems almost trite when you're chronically ill and nothing feels good, but it is important when you're actually trying to get somewhere good. Yeah, very. We do have to get the mental mind game strong in order for the diets to work, because if the cortisol is 24/7, it doesn't matter what you do, really what you eat, right?
Absolutely.
Yes. Yeah. I really do think the sterilization that's been going on, along with, I don't know. Okay, so I've been out of the States for a long time, but I just moved back. And the amount of polyester I see everywhere is insane. It's insane. And the amount of wearing fitness clothes when you're not working out, which is polyester, which is plastic, with the badge of honor of it being recycled, which is off-gassing, which is getting in the way of your lungs doing what they need to do so your liver doesn't have to take the burden, is massive. I think it's a massive problem. And that is shifting the microbiome in very specific ways. And for those of you who feel that because of this genetic synapsis and that one, you can't get better, I can almost guarantee Jen and I and everybody else have a whole host. We had the whole light. I mean, mine was lit up.
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
Yep. Mine too. Oh, yeah.
Yes. Definitely. And there are incredible microbes that come in your food if it's not sterilized that fix those for you. They turn it off for you. You don't have to know about it. They do it for you. They are magic. Yeah. So like, I don't know. I keep talking about the Ozempic. We talk about it in our last meeting?
Mhm.
I just think it's cool because everyone is getting on the Ozempic and the peptide train, but the original Ozempic is Akkermansia. It's the bacteria, right? And if you don't have Akkermansia, you very likely have MTHFR. You very likely have BRCA as well. You get that Akkermansia in you, and those suckers shut off. You start producing your own B1. right? So there are really wonderful things that go along in nature. The more we line ourselves up, the more they gravitate towards us. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Okay, let's see here. All right. Oh, that's an interesting one. Okay. Well, okay, this person's asking about Parkinson's. So, Parkinson's, there are two conditions with Parkinson's. The condition is, or the question is, what can we do for Parkinson's? So much is the short answer. It's, yeah, so much. The, uh, all of Jen's work is like paramount for dealing with any nervous system disorder. So definitely dive into that, but also, work on your dopamine, right? So true Parkinson's, not the mimicking one, will really respond to dopamine. And there's very set microbes that build up your dopamine. It's also activities that boost your dopamine, right? So most of the activities that are talked about on the podcast, like the podcast bros, those are for men actually, and men and women are very different, but there is a truth to the depletion of dopamine from not doing tasks, actually, like putting a burden on yourself of doing things. So like what you were talking about, Jen, earlier about what you said to yourself, like, okay, I'm going to imagine myself in 5-10 years. That actually allows for dopamine release. Whereas if you put a
Mm.
short timeline on it, you're depleting your dopamine, right? Yeah, definitely. Light in the eyes is massive, massive. Yeah, there's actually quite a bit. Jen, what would you tell someone for Parkinson's?
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, dopamine's huge. There's herbs that you can use also for dopamine. Like you turned me on to Mucuna pruriens. I've looked into that a lot. That's a really awesome one. But yeah, the lifestyle is huge. Um, I do think that we have to address the gut when we're talking about this, because I think there's been a lot of interesting research around things like parasites and viruses that get into the nervous system with some of these nervous system disorders, so these neurological conditions. And so we've got to like really make sure that your immune system can naturally fight those things off. And so working on the gut, uh, high fat diet is going to be super important for repairing the myelin sheaths on the nerves and just repairing the nervous system in general. And then, I've kind of come full circle in how I work, where I was so focused on the nervous system and trauma. And then I was like, oh no, like it's all nutrition. And I went and got all my certifications and started doing it. And it did help a lot of people. It does help a lot of people. But I've kind of come full circle when now I'm like, and like we also need to look at like the emotional blockages, right? Because stored energy from stress and trauma that we experience do get stored in the nervous system. And so many nervous system disorders do mimic these dysregulated states in the nervous system. So like shaking or feeling paralyzed, like that is your nervous system in a state of trauma. And so it could be like, a capital T trauma contributing to being in this chronic stress state in the nervous system. But it could also just be these smaller emotional traumas or invalidations, or, dysfunctional relationship dynamics that have just kind of played out through your life that are just contributing to this like constrictive effect on your nervous system patterns. And so as much as we need to like improve your immune system and deal with viruses and parasites, we also need to look at like your emotional patterns simultaneously. And I just think that marriage, of recognizing that the gut and brain are not separate and they feedback loop into each other is so essential.
Yeah, I would say they need an equal footing, like a human with
Yeah.
two legs. Yeah, very much so. Because as we get generation and generation, a deeper wound to the microbiome, we
Yes.
become more prone to the traumas, right? So when
Yes.
someone has a really healthy microbiome and they, and a healthy nervous system, and they go through a trauma, they're likely to come out stronger from that trauma. Whereas when someone goes in, or was born with less, they, at least in the studies, are more likely to get the long-term effects of that. right? And so it's really changing. And I do see, I mean, my just like my knee-jerk reaction, and that doesn't probably means it's wrong, but I so wish I could wash away all of the blame on folks that tends to come their way when they're sick, that they
Yeah.
it's their fault when there's all these people walking around that are a hot mess and they don't have illness. So you know
Oh,
what I mean? Yes. Yes, completely. So
yeah. Yeah, the
yeah.
you make your own reality crowd needs to really like redo their message.
Or they just need
Before
to experience illness
this.
and trying to get better themselves, like let's
Yeah,
just give them a little
yeah,
bit of dose of that. No, I think it's
yeah.
very relevant and it's incredibly important. Like I remember I worked with someone once who was in a really horrific home state. And I did tell them, I was like, I need you out if we're going to do anything, because if the stress is too extreme, it makes the mountain you have to climb so difficult, and it not always a thing you can do, right? Whereas I think if you look at both, you're like, okay, this is an opportunity. It's an
Yes.
opportunity to really go in and fix some of this stuff and relook at and see it from a different point of view, and give myself the person I needed back then, right? And to rebuild at the same time. I think that's ideal, because then you come out and those things aren't a problem for you anymore. And you can help others in those positions as well and break some of those patterns if they're in a family. So
Yeah.
I think there's no question we can get better with the internal work alone, because people have done it. A lot of people
Yes.
have done it. Yes. So absolutely. But I just want to put a little clause on it, my personal clause, which doesn't mean it's right, which is that I hope you all at home don't feel like it's your fault that you're sick, like at all, because nobody asked for this and nobody wants it.
No.
Yeah.
No one chooses this path. I think it can become, something that provides an immense amount of meaning and purpose and resilience, but it's not something that you would wish on anyone or anyone causes. And, to your point, I love that you brought up the microbiome and things like making you more susceptible to stress and trauma, because I looked into that research a bit and it's wild. Like I saw there was a study in particular that struck me so much where they were studying refugees actually, and they found that the refugees that were more likely to develop PTSD, like clinical PTSD from their experiences, were the ones with higher levels of lead in their brains.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
And so it's one of these things. It's a feedback loop, and this is why I don't like people who say, it's all in the gut or it's all in the brain. Like these things feedback loop into each other. Like you have a high toxic load, you are going to be more easily dysregulated in your nervous system, which is going to make your detox pathways back up even more, which is going to make you even more stressed out to even smaller events. And you can see how people just get backed into this corner. I mean, I was certainly there,
No,
just like
1,000%.
completely in the corner of like toxicity and stress that like seem to never end.
Yes, 1,000%, 1,000%. Because, like, okay, let's just say that you had a C. diff, or you picked it up and your body's been fighting it off. So you just have like chronic C. diff, right? Lots of people are walking around with that. They don't know that they have it, but that is blocking your B1 from being absorbed. So that leads to nerve degeneration. It means that your dopamine isn't going to be produced as well. So when you go through stress, you are a stress case. You're not handling it with grace, right? You're not going to produce your tyrosine properly, and
Yeah.
most likely many other microbes are going to get blocked at the same time, right? It's very common when you have C. diff for a lot of your beneficial bacteria, like Akkermansia, actually, although that's not one that you and I tend to see as much, but the being an issue, right? But there are about 6 different bacteria that if you have an overgrowth in just C. diff, that's just one of trillions, right?
Yeah.
That's no longer can make a house in your body, and therefore making your building blocks of your feel good chemicals is impaired. I do think we have a connection with something much higher than all the things we talk about. So these are one aspect. When Jen and I are talking about them, there's so many so many
Yeah.
graces that tend to come out of a world we have not seen, but there's something to keep in mind, definitely. And I think I'll just never forget the case my mom always told me about. She was a teacher and she had a little girl who was 5 years old, who everyone thought was just a psychopath before that was a term, basically. And it
Yeah.
turned out she just had lead poisoning. And as soon as that lead was out, she was the sweetest thing, you know?
Yeah.
Totally.
Yeah. Yeah.
Totally. Okay, let's see here. Okay, Jen, this is a unique case. Severe hypothyroidism despite no plants, GAPS diet, B1, and circadian lifestyle.
So they're asking why?
Yeah, basically. Yeah, yes, why? No, we don't have a timeline for them. I don't know the person, so I can't say how long they've done it. But yeah, any idea?
Well, I mean, I don't necessarily see carnivore as a necessarily the way to resolve hypothyroid specifically. I mean, you know, if your thyroid is stressed because you have gut dysbiosis, then yeah, a carnivore diet might help that. But I've seen a lot of people whose thyroid gets low on carnivore, but my argument to that always is, if there's a more important reason for you to be on carnivore, like let's triage that a little bit. You know, and like if you've got, depending on what else is going on, but if you're trying to just resolve hypothyroid, I wouldn't necessarily say carnivore is the best route to take. And B1 is great. I mean, I know you love B1 as well. We can talk about that. I have some questions actually people asked about B1 as well, but you know, the thyroid really needs minerals. Like the thyroid needs like zinc, selenium, iodine. So, you know, at least including seafood in your carnivore diet, which is naturally going to be high in those nutrients, but potentially supplementing those as well. I mean, I think all three of those, I almost like, if I'm running like HTMA tests on my client, which I am more often these days, like across the board, I tend to see those low, like selenium and zinc, especially. So that would definitely be a piece to address.
I totally agree. Yeah, I wouldn't go to carnivore just for hypothyroidism. I wouldn't, don't do it. But it's not, I've never found that deep of a protocol necessary. If that's attractive to you, go for it. But I mean, for me personally, it was working with a specific amino acid and certain deficiencies that resolved it. I'd look at iodine content of the food, so definitely seafood if possible. And then I would also really look at up and down in the body. Usually with the thyroid, it's either up higher in the pituitary hypothalamus or down lower in the liver, meaning
Liver,
especially for women, we usually really have to look at, are we are we getting rid of our cortisol? Are we overproducing? Is it at the wrong time? Working on the HRV. So, and some of the vegetables can be really great for thyroid, honestly. So I would look at timelines, and then I wouldn't just do B1. So I know I talk about B1 a lot, but that's because B1 is an enzyme for the other like an enzyme for the other B vitamins, and because we don't have a lot of it in our diet, and most of us have grown up on diets that deplete it. So the combination is problematic, whereas the other Bs are much easier to get in the diet. So typically don't need supplementation, not always, of course, like B6 for reverse my neuropathy. So I don't mean across the board, but what I don't usually talk about is B2, because B2, once you fill yourself on B1, that is also used as an enzyme. And this person is a thyroid case, but in long C and dysautonomia and MCAT, I see when I look at SpectraCells or nutraceuticals where they go within the cell, I see a lot of B2, which makes sense. Not if we look at it in a reductionist way, because we're eating. But if you don't have the bacteria for B2, that makes a lot of sense. And then that applies, if you don't have that one, then you can't absorb the other B vitamins. And so there's a lot of like downhill things that if you just kind of spend enough time with patience and dedication and consistency, will pan out on their own very often. But it does take long. It does take a while if we don't go into the nitty gritty.
Absolutely. Yeah, it took me a while to get out of low thyroid. I am actually out of low thyroid finally. But it took a while, you know. I mean, that's I feel like sometimes the hormones the body sees a little more superficial, so it'll like resolve those imbalances last.
1,000%. And also, a lot of the thyroid cases I see, I mean, mine was really different, right? Mine did reverse really fast, but I also had a very different case.
Yeah.
The chronic hypothyroidism, I tend to see most in women, and most in women that are overextended. And so unless we get
Yes.
that, yeah, unless we get real rest, which I swear is not in the, it is not even in the dictionary here in the USA.
Yeah.
Like people, when they think they're resting, it's not even close to what every
Yeah.
other countries get on a daily basis. So, let alone vacation. I think unless there's a real look at what our sex hormones need and how our body is processing that and what real rest feels like, it's very difficult to get at some of the hormonal glands. Yeah, but it doesn't have to
Yeah.
be. Yes. Mhm. Yeah. Do you want to go into the other V1 questions?
Yeah, so one question was, I
Mhm.
thought I would make sure you could answer this. Does
Mhm.
POTS actually resolve? Like, do the vitals actually return to normal? A question about getting B1 from food, and a question about proper pork preparation on that topic. Um, so I think this is so interesting because you were saying before, like, oh, we have all these healing stories on YouTube now. Like people can see that people recover, but Mary, every single day online, I have people in my comments telling me, you're lying. MCAS can't be reversed. You're lying. POTS can't be reversed. These are incurable diseases. Like every day I have these. So even though there's these stories out there, like I don't know whether there's just not enough exposure of these stories, or there's a mental block that some people have around it, or both. But I don't know. Can you speak to that at all?
Yeah, I got a similar question. Wait, I got to read this because I shouldn't have laughed, but I did laugh out loud. Let's see. I can't imagine a 160 heart rate being normal without medication.
Right.
And does the heart rate actually resolve? I think people usually just stop checking vitals. That just made me want to wear a heart rate monitor for the public. Yes, it can resolve it. I don't think it resolves on its own. I mean, maybe it does. I haven't seen it, but oh my gosh, I'm not walking around with 160 anymore. Let me tell you that my heart rate is slow.
You would not be traipsing through the jungle with a heart rate like that. I don't
Oh,
think.
I wouldn't be walking anywhere. My gosh, I would not be. I wouldn't be. I would be dead by now, to be frank. So no, I think part of it, and I could be so wrong. If anyone is listening and is coming from this place, please do try to explain it to us so that we can understand. If I try to imagine where this is coming from, I would imagine that it comes from a place of not getting validation for what they're going through already. So I think it might be like an insult for someone to be like, I'm better, because then
Right.
they're like, I don't get validation and now there's this. No, you
Right.
couldn't have had this because nobody gets better from this kind of
Right.
thing. And I
Yeah.
think that again comes from the lack in the community of
Yeah.
actual
Yeah.
support and kindness. Yeah.
Yeah. And my I don't know that note, my blood pressure used to be like 85/60, like all the time. And like last time I checked it, it was like 115/75. And I was like, nice. So but also I get that thing too of like, oh, you just made lifestyle shifts that mask your symptoms, like you didn't really reverse the illness. And I think that's an interesting point because in some ways, like, okay, yeah, I don't drink alcohol anymore. I don't eat fast food anymore. Like, I don't sit and watch true crime documentaries all the time anymore. Like, I have made permanent lifestyle shifts that, yeah, do lessen my symptoms. But at the same time, I think it's invalidating for you and I when I'm doing things like climbing mountains or eating bowlfuls of sauerkraut or like things that there's no way I would have been, staying in a hotel room with scented sheets, and being okay. Like all these things that absolutely would have destroyed me before, that now it's like no problem. So I mean, if you're asking like, could I go back to like, eating fast food and ice cream every night? I mean, yeah, maybe my illness would come back. It certainly might, but I just think we have to zoom out a little bit at like what the real purpose of that question is. Is it like out of this desire to be normal again and not have consequences? You know what I'm saying?
Yes, absolutely. And I think you also brought up a really good point too, that it's actually very invalidating to those that did go through it and got better, which I've never heard anyone bring up. And that's very, very true. So sorry, Phoenix is making some noise. He just moved his
Oh,
dinner bowl. Someone is hungry. The No, that's very true. I can say, because I have been in remission so long now, there were several years after I went into remission that I didn't mess with it, which comes from a different mindset than I would have had while I was in the thick of it or before. And that's the mindset of like, I want to get back to where I was. When you go through this, at least so far that I've seen, and I'm sure there's exceptions, but you have no desire to go back to the place that set you up. And
yeah,
also, you really kind of hone in real joy and real health, which feels so good. And it's from a healthy place, it's not from a rigid place. So for me, I locked that in, and then I had fluidity. And I have to say, when I started eating starch again, which I did uh, way later, I mean, so many years after remission, but not out of fear. I didn't eat those foods out of gratitude. I would have eaten nothing but eyeballs if that would have gotten my life back. So
yeah.
I mean, that was not a sacrifice for me to be doing yoga in the morning. It was a pleasure. And to do and to do a cold rinse and meditate, I loved my meditation. I couldn't wait for the next morning. And the idea that food brought pleasure was like, it's like living in a different dimension. I was getting pleasure from my food. My food tasted good. And more than that, I had satiety. I wasn't
Yep.
hungry.
Mhm.
I think one of the gifts of even before you heal, but when you start to really rebuild some of those pathways and feel good chemicals, um, you just feel satisfied. You don't have that yearning
Yeah.
anymore. And that is priceless. So, and I will say too, I do have flexibility. I can eat whatever the H I want. I really do. And I also don't care. I also don't care. But even when I've done things for a while, nothing has happened. I have drinks, I have cocktails on occasion. I don't drink like a college student. I haven't been drunk since my early 20s, but maybe before that. Yeah, definitely. But but I tend to live in a way where I feel as good tomorrow morning as I do right now. And anything else
Yes.
isn't worth it to me. Yeah, absolutely. But I also want to circle back to the idea that, oh, if you change your whatever, then it's not a true remission. Well, do we say that about any medication or surgery? No. I don't know
Okay.
about you all, but like if a war comes, right? I always used to think about this. I go very left brain sometimes. When I was ill and when I had my thyroid disease, I would think about if a war was coming, and if it did, what would I do? Because when a war comes, you can't get medicine. You also can't pick your much of anything, right? And
Yeah.
so with a thyroid disease, if you can't get medicine, you can be screwed. So
Yeah.
and that was, one of many problems. So that was more my impetus towards, okay, I got to fix this because this is a false
Yeah.
solution. This is a shallow solution at best, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's a good point. Yeah.
Okay.
So I think pork is both of our like favorite B1 rich food. So I'll just say that pork is a really good one. Liver, some seafood like halibut, salmon are good. Sunflower seeds, actually, if that's included in your diet right now, are really good. But there was a question on, I guess there was something Weston A. Price put out about proper pork preparation. Have you seen any like special traditional preparation of pork, like when you were in Okinawa or anything like that?
Oh, what do you know what the preparation was?
No, they didn't say. They just said that pork could thicken the blood if not properly prepared from Weston A. Price. I've never heard of this.
No, me either, unfortunately. I'd have to look it up. I see pork. So anytime I go to island nations or warm cultures in general, like a lot of Latin American, Greece, these kind of places eat enormous amounts of pork. And there's a season to it, as there is for anything. Now I do see the under the ground roast in many of the cultures, in the
Yeah.
banana leaf roast. Yeah, the slow cooking. I see a lot of that. But no, I'm gonna look that
Yeah.
up, see if I can find it.
Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah. Let's see. All right, let's see. Weston A. Price pork. Let's see if we get it. I would imagine too that we're going to discover other ways to get B1, because it is odd how difficult it is to get for how important it is, don't you think?
Right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think so. Yeah, definitely. I do. Oh, there it is. Okay. I do know that there's a number of bacteria that belong in the microbiome primarily that are given through birth that are B1 producing, but right now we don't have a way of getting those. So pork is our best bet that I know of. Yeah. Okay. They're talking about live blood analysis. Oh, you know what they're talking about? They're talking about microbes that can come along with pork. So
Uh,
yeah, let's talk about that actually. I think that's
yeah.
important. Yeah, because people are afraid of pork. Listen, folks, when we're talking about pathogens,
Just
you know
to
what?
turn my light on.
Yeah. When we're talking about pathogens, what's really missed is what's going on that you're susceptible to the pathogens, right? So we all know about things that help the immune
Things that
system,
help your immune.
laughter and sleep and other things. But we also have microbes that almost all microbes, at least, well, I don't want to speak in absolutes, but all microbes that I've studied, and you guys should see my back end of my charts of the bacteria, it's unhealthy. The they have antagonists. C. diff has an antagonist. All of these microbes have antagonists that we should
Wow.
have in our body from our
Yeah.
diet, birthing. And when we have these things are nothing to us. So it's not a thing to live in fear. And I say that as someone who lost 12 years of my life to an infection. Infections are not something to fear. It is something to learn about how we belong in nature and what things we can invite into our lives so that we are protected and we don't ever have to think about those things, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, I would say there's quite a bit of fear mongering in general about pork in different regions of the world, cultures, all sorts of things, and not that it's unfounded. Some of these regions don't have immune systems very well, right? Because they're living modern lives and they have heat without refrigeration. And if you have those three things, no, please, I don't know if I would recommend that either. But
Yeah.
yeah, otherwise it's a superfood. Yeah.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, I think I get so many people that are really terrified of like making their own ferments, for example, because they're so afraid that they're going to do it wrong and they're going to get sick. And, all of these microbes, I think, Mary, you're talking about ones that, oh, well, this is important, that's important, oxalobacter is important, but like, we can't get them in probiotics. Like, how are we going to do this? And it's like, we can get probiotics every day through our diet and lifestyle. Like we don't have to take supplements. If you're eating fermented foods, if you're barefoot in the dirt, if you can like sometimes maybe even swim in some natural water, there's just so many ways. If you can get like farmers market produce that is like pesticide free and so it hasn't been bleach washed, right, but it's got little specks of dirt still on it. I mean, there's so many of these natural ways to get so much more of a beneficial diversity of microbes than you're ever going to get from a bottle at the supermarket.
I would say primarily the supermarket probiotics are a waste of time and money. I
Yeah.
used to really not believe in probiotics at all outside of food. Now I have relationships with labs where I get amazing things. And I think reality, I do think the future of medicine is primarily light, sound, and bacteria. I really do. But the microbes, the
Oh, I
phages,
love that.
yeah, 1,000%. I really do. But the strains that are so good are not typically found, or I am finding companies with them though. It's that you have to know a lot because it is the subspecies that matters and that does things. And there are so many microbes that you cannot get through your food and soil. But if you aren't getting microbes through food and soil, I don't see the point in going next level and trying to get them, right? You want to cover your bases and see where you can get yourself on your own. The
Yeah.
one you can't, though, you can get through human touch. And I think the fact that we are all
Oh,
sterilizing ourselves and isolating
yeah.
and not dancing, not sweating, not
Yeah.
cuddling, yeah, that lack of that was our safety net, right? When I go
Right.
to the indigenous cultures, that's the safety net. They all snuggle, they are all constantly touching each other. So they're sharing their microbes. So if one person had a pathogen they don't even know about because they're not getting sick, and so they're lacking nutrition from something, they can pick up the antagonists from someone that they're hugging and take
Yeah.
care of it without ever having to see a lab coat, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. Any last questions that you would like to pull in for this session from your list?
Um, there is one question which might actually be a really nice wrap-up question, which was, what would each of us do differently? Like if we could go back and do our healing journey again, if there is anything we would have done differently. I thought that was a really interesting question.
That's a really good question. I think that's a perfect one to wrap it up on. Okay. Do you want to go first?
Yeah, I know. I was just thinking about it. I don't know if I would have done a whole lot differently, honestly. I think I think it actually relates to more the end of my journey. Because I think that I had a lot of, like, when I was really ill, kind of a part of my brain, I think, just kind of like shut off, and I was just kind of like going through the trenches, of healing. And when that really started turning back on, when I really started seeing progress, there was like this backlog of trauma from the illness and healing experience that I think I hadn't really dealt with. And I think I was so excited to start feeling better that part of me really wanted to prove to myself and to the world that I was better. And so I think I started doing things for the sake of proving to myself that I could, which in some ways was really beautiful, because it's like all the things I had dreamed of doing, I'm going to do. But at the same time, I think one thing that chronic illness did for me, which you kind of brought up around like truly resting, I think the 2 years I was really, really ill was probably the first time I actually really rested in my whole life. And it was like the more I rested, almost the more tired I felt. And I realized it was just this like deep well of fatigue that I had been like masking for years and years and years. But being like a very type A person, like always wanting to do more things and learn more things and experience more things, like once I had more energy stores, it was like, okay, now I'm going to do everything that I missed out on. And I started realizing that I was like falling back into these like very rigid stress patterns, that I had before. And so luckily I had the insight to really catch it, before I ended up like crashing again. And actually I've had to a few times like catch myself before I really fully crash again. Be like, oh right, like this was a lesson in like being differently in the world. Right. And it's so easy to just revert back into old values or old ways. And so I guess I do see people who like get better, but then revert back to an old pattern and suddenly they're back where they were before. And so easing into life in a way that is very intentional, I think, is an important thing to think about ahead of time. Like, how are you going to bring the lessons you've learned in your illness into your life later on?
Yeah, I think that's a really big one. I think I would have to think about it to give a very deep answer, because I often think the opposite. I think if I didn't know what I know now, I would do the exact same thing. I would just bottom out so many times and fail so many times and drop into despair so many times. But with what I know now, well, for one, I wouldn't know what I know now if I didn't go through what I did, and I wouldn't
Yeah.
have the incredible connection to you and to the thousands of people that I've gone through this too, and to be
Yeah.
able to hold that light, like that's a gift for me, and it's also I wouldn't have the contrast of my life is so beautiful now because I have the contrast of what a real horror show life can be, right?
Yeah.
And so I don't know, but I think if I if I could talk to my old self, I would come back as like a sweet grandma character and hope that I would learn the lesson, to your point.
Yeah.
So that I would drop the desperation, because the desperation leads to actions that dig you deeper into the holes.
Yeah.
To calmly really look at the situation and give myself grace and
Yeah.
see what I'm going through, with the real situation, instead of just trying to take whatever so I could function, kind of thing. And then on the other side of it, outside, like post remission, I would go back and tell myself, be wise about where you use these skills that you learned, because
Mhm.
the very things that are your saving grace when you have no power can dig you into a hole when you do. So for instance, I'm very often talking to people about reframing and focusing on what's going right. And that is a saving grace when you cannot control your immediate circumstance, right? When you are in a
Yeah.
prison, when you are locked in a bed, when you are in a hellacious health situation. But you do not want to apply that to situations that you can change.
Mm.
Yeah, so
Mhm.
I'd say
Yeah.
definitely still use that skill, but ask yourself if you should, because that can
Right.
definitely get people into trouble, right? So I think those would be the main ones. And to have fun with it. Honestly, as crazy as that sounds, like shirk off the stress of it and see what you can do to make it silly, because there's no fun in illness. Like, it's the most serious, dreadful, awful thing to go through, and it's awful for you. So wherever you can bring in a little silliness and figure out what can get your tickle bone, like your funny bone, when you're sick, that is a great gift that you can give to yourself, because nobody's going to give you gifts until you get better. That's the reality of it. So we got to give it to ourselves, right? Yeah.
I mean, coffee enemas were kind of the funniest thing ever, if you really think about it. So
I mean, it's hilarious. It's actually hilarious. I was just recommending Chris Carr's books on cancer, because she got that. And I know it can be easier for those, or it can be easy for us to write off folks that have conditions that don't have the symptoms, right? That's very often many cases of cancer, not all, of course, some cancer diagnoses have horrific symptoms, but some do not. And other conditions do not. They're bad on paper, they're bad in reality, but they're not bad in day to day. Whereas I imagine anyone listening is in the bad day to day. So it's different. But honestly, her books are brilliant on how to not take life seriously and how to make it funny. And
yeah.
so anything to help with that is a really good thing to bring in. I do wish I would have brought that and a light presence in earlier, like an Eckhart Tolle type light presence in earlier. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Beautiful.
Okay, good. Well, Jen, this has been a freaking gift. We have to do this again, and I will.
Yeah, it's so fun. I know. I feel like we could keep going, but I
Oh my
should
gosh.
probably get off my
I
computer.
know. Yes, we will. Well, and we want to be mindful of
Tell you.
everybody back home too, because so many spoons. But
Yes.
yeah, if you let me, we'll pull you back on, and I'll put all your information below. So anyone who wants to find Jen, if you don't already know who she is, which if you don't, that's crazy, but that's okay. Everything will be down below as soon as we can publish this after the live stream, and you can find her. Post more questions below. Definitely post what would be nice for you to have if you're in the thick of illness, so that we can help get that into the public consciousness. And otherwise, you'll find something that makes you laugh. Okay. All right.
Good. Thank you.